My research focuses on the idea of Indigenous studies, so that is Native Americans, literature, and First Nations in Canada. And it's a research focus that essentially starts with the idea, stereotypical idea, of Winnetou and James Fenimore Cooper's The Last of the Mohicans. And this idea says that Native cultures have essentially vanished. And our research, my own research, actually focuses on countering that stereotype with the vibrancy of Native literatures today. And it's a framework that links Native cultures in the US and Canada to, for instance, Maori cultures in New Zealand and Aboriginal cultures in Australia. So it's a very transnational framework. And it's essential for us that we take that international framework into account, because essentially all these cultures have been colonized by settler cultures who countered their oral literatures with written texts and hence became dominant. It's important for us that our research is linked to our teaching, so the students get a sense that these are our research topics, and we essentially share our research with them, but also we develop our research in dialogue with the students. One of the focal points of Indigenous studies and comparative Indigenous studies is to compare, for instance, film blockbuster movies such as Avatar with Native American literature. So the students get the idea that essentially Hollywood invents vanishing Indians that sort of only live on in outer space, but Native authors resist this stereotype. So there's a very strong intermediate focus. And also the comparative approach, linking Native American issues in the US to, for instance, Australian communities, Australian Aboriginal literature, means that we're inviting scholars and writers. For instance, from Australia, we've invited Kim Scott, award-winning author from Australia, to Mainz. So the students get a sense of the vibrancy of Indigenous communities all over the globe, with an emphasis, of course, on the US and Native American culture. Well, any approach that looks at Indigenous cultures comparatively has necessarily to be international, transnational. So we have to invite colleagues from the US and Canada, but also Australia and New Zealand. That in itself is a very specific, but also very international focus. At the same time, our idea of transnational American studies link the US to other parts of the globe. So we're cooperating with colleagues from Taiwan, as well as Australia and Canada and the US, of course. And that has been very important to us because we have to look at how our research can be translated into their context. And we, of course, in turn, are inspired by what their research focuses on. So it's a very international dialogue that actually shapes our research and that we want to share with the students.